powerful CEO dumped a plate of hot food over a pregnant woman's head right there in her own diner. The crash of dishes silenced every table. Coffee spilled. No one dared to move as she stood trembling, her apron stained, her eyes full of tears. He straightened his expensive coat, smirking, certain that money made him untouchable. But he made one mistake, a fatal one. Because at that very moment, the door opened. A Navy SEAL, freshly home from war, stepped out of the storm, and behind him, his K-9 partner growled low, ready to move. Justice had just walked in. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, leave a like if you believe in courage and second chances, and subscribe for more stories where faith and love still win. Snow fell in thick, whispering sheets over Pine Valley, a small mountain town tucked beneath a ridge of frozen pines and half-buried roads. The air was sharp, the kind that burned the lungs with every breath. Inside Valley Diner, a modest roadside cafe smelling of coffee, butter, and old stories, Anna Hayes, 30 years old and 6 months pregnant, moved gently between tables. She was the kind of woman whose presence quieted noise. Her hair, chestnut brown and tied back loosely, framed a face pale from exhaustion but softened by kindness. Years of waiting for her husband to return from service had carved patience into her bones, though her eyes, gray and thoughtful, still carried the flicker of hope. It was nearing noon when the door swung open with the sound of a bell and a gust of snow. Ryan Cole, a man who looked like he'd never known cold, stepped inside. He was in his mid-40s, tall, fit in the way wealth can afford, with slicked-back silver hair and a jaw that had never trembled in apology. His suit was tailored charcoal wool, his gloves black leather, and his expression sharp as broken glass. Cole was the CEO of Coal Mining and Logistics, the most powerful employer in the county, and he wore that power like armor. Behind him followed a broad, silent bodyguard with a scar running down his cheek, a man who had long ago traded conscience for paychecks. "Service seems slow here," Cole remarked, his tone dripping with disdain as he brushed invisible dust from his sleeve. Anna turned, setting down 2 plates at the counter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Cole," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're a bit busy today, but I'll get your order right away." Cole glanced around unimpressed. "Busy?" he sneered. "Half these people couldn't afford a cup of my coffee." He smirked, leaning back in his chair, watching her like prey. When Anna accidentally spilled a few drops of coffee while refilling his cup, his face twisted. Without warning, he grabbed the steaming plate in front of him and threw it, the food splattering across her hair and shoulders. The diner went silent. Hot soup dripped from her hair onto her apron, pooling on the floor. Anna froze, breath shallow, the room spinning as shame and fear tangled in her chest. She could feel her baby stir, tiny, helpless, and she fought the trembling in her hands. I'll clean it," she whispered, her voice breaking. Cole laughed, a hollow, cruel sound that filled the diner. "That's right. Maybe next time you'll learn how to serve someone who actually matters." The other customers, farmers, truckers, old men in wool caps, lowered their eyes. None dared to move. Fear had long since taken root in Pine Valley, and Cole's name was its shadow. But then, the bell above the door clanged again. A gust of freezing wind swept through, scattering napkins and shaking the window panes. A man stepped in, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat dusted with snow. His hair was dark, unkempt from the road, his beard rough with weeks of travel. His eyes, icy blue and piercing, carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. This was Michael Hayes, 38, former Navy SEAL, soldier, survivor, husband. 12 years of war had stripped him of softness, but not of soul. Beside him, padding silently, was Blitz, a 5-year-old German shepherd, coat sable gray with hints of silver at the muzzle, a scar on his left paw from a mission long past. Blitz's gaze was steady, intelligent, the kind of animal that read fear before scent. Michael's boots echoed once on the wooden floor before the silence returned. His eyes moved from the spilled food to Anna's trembling hands. He didn't blink. The storm outside raged, but the one building behind his stare was colder. "Put your hand down," he said evenly, his voice calm but edged like a knife, "and apologize to my wife." Cole turned, startled, then smirked when he recognized the uniform beneath the coat. A soldier? How quaint, he said, straightening his tie. You must be the husband. Tell me, does the army teach you to keep your women in line, or... He didn't finish. Blitz took a step forward, low growl rumbling like thunder beneath the floorboards. The customers froze, cups suspended midair. Cole's smirk faltered for the first time. Michael's gaze didn't waver. You'll walk out that door, he said, but you'll do it after you say you're sorry. For a moment, Cole said nothing. Then he laughed again, brittle and empty. You think I'm scared of you? He spat. I own this town. Michael took one step closer. Then it's time someone reminded you it's not for sale. The diner seemed to exhale. Cole muttered something under his breath, grabbed his coat, and stormed toward the exit. As the door slammed behind him, the wind carried his curses into the snow. Michael turned to Anna. Her shoulders were shaking, but when she looked at him, tears met a small, fragile smile. You came home, she whispered. He reached out, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead, his rough fingers trembling slightly. And I'm not leaving again, he said quietly. Blitz lay at their feet, eyes still fixed on the door, ears perked. Outside, the snow thickened, falling heavier now, as if the sky itself was sealing the moment in silence. But deep inside Pine Valley, a storm far greater than snow had just begun. Night settled heavily over Pine Valley, the wind dragging long sighs through the trees. The snowstorm had passed, but the cold that followed was sharper, quiet, watchful. In the small cabin at the edge of town, Michael Hayes sat by the fire, gently pressing a damp cloth against Anna's forehead. The faint red mark from the scalding soup still lingered, angry against her pale skin. Anna, wrapped in a wool blanket, looked fragile under the soft lamplight. Her hair, once neatly tied, now fell in loose strands around her shoulders. Her hands rested protectively on her stomach, and the tremor in her voice was not just fear. It was exhaustion from too many lonely nights. He'll come back, she whispered. You saw his eyes. He won't let this go. Michael's hand paused. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Then he said quietly, I've lived through wars, Anna. Men like him, they think fear is a weapon. But they've never seen what happens when a man fights for something that can't be taken from him. He looked at her then, truly looked, at the woman who had written him letters every month during deployments, who had waded through storms and silence. She tried to smile, but her eyes glistened. I just want our child to grow up in peace, she said softly. Michael reached over, his rough hand covering hers. He will, he promised, because I'm done fighting other people's wars. This time, it's mine. Outside, Blitz lay at the porch, a shadow among the falling snow. The dog's fur bristled with each gust of wind, his ears erect, nose twitching. Every few minutes, he let out a low growl, not from fear, but from the memory of battle. The instincts of a war dog never slept. Hours later, the town was still, blanketed in white silence. Then, somewhere down the road, an engine growled. Headlights cut through the trees, stopping in front of the cabin. Two men stepped out, unshaven, heavy-built, the kind who carried violence like a second skin. One flicked his cigarette into the snow and smirked. This must be the hero's house, he muttered. Cole sends his regards. A rock crashed against the window, shattering glass. Anna gasped from inside. Blitz was already on his feet, teeth bared, eyes gleaming in the dark. Before the second rock hit, Michael opened the door, stepping out into the night with the calm of a man who had faced death too many times to fear it. The intruders barely had time to move. Michael's body shifted low, precise. Military reflexes honed over years. A fist struck first, clean and hard. One man dropped to his knees. The second swung a metal rod, but Blitz lunged, knocking him flat into the snow. A shout, a crunch, a heartbeat, and then silence. When the last echo faded, the two men stumbled away, limping into the forest. Blitz growled low, wanting to chase, but Michael stopped him with a soft whistle. The snow fell thicker now, covering the tisses. Blood spots near the porch. Michael bent down, picking up something from the ground, a black ID card, half buried in slush. The logo glinted faintly under the porch light, coal mining and logistics. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tightening. Inside, Anna called his name softly, her voice trembling. He turned, looked back at her through the broken window, and finally said, almost to himself, "This isn't just between him and me anymore." Above the valley, the pine forest swayed, whispering secrets into the wind. Somewhere beyond the hills, the powerful were stirring, and the soldier who once swore never to fight again knew he had already stepped back into war. Morning broke cold and colorless over Pine Valley. The snow had settled thick overnight, turning the roads into pale ribbons between the trees. Inside the small cabin, the wood stove hissed softly. Michael Hayes sat at the table, his coffee untouched, eyes tracing the frost on the window. He looked older than the night before, like the war had returned to his shoulders while he slept. A knock came at the door, firm but hesitant. Sheriff Tom Carter stepped in, brushing snow from his coat. He was in his 50s, tall but slightly stooped, with lines of fatigue cutting deep across his face. His uniform looked worn, not from neglect, but from the years of compromises it carried. Carter was a man who once believed in law, until power taught him how fragile it was. His gray mustache twitched as he spoke, his voice a low gravel. "Michael, I know what happened last night, and I know who sent those men." Michael didn't turn. "Then you know why I can't stand by." Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "Cole owns the town council, the bank, half the police department in the county. You take a step toward him, you'll disappear before you ever see a courtroom." Michael finally looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, only an iron calm. "I didn't come home to win, Sheriff. I came home to protect what's left." The silence between them was heavy. Carter studied him a long moment, then shook his head. "You're your own kind of fool, Hayes," he muttered. "But maybe that's what this town needs." He turned to leave, but his words lingered in the air like gun smoke. That afternoon, the town awoke to chaos. A low boom echoed from the hills, rattling the diner windows and shaking snow from rooftops. Black smoke curled above Cole's quarry, thick and angry against the white horizon. Sirens wailed, their sound bouncing between the frozen cliffs. By the time Michael arrived, the site was a scene of devastation. Machinery lay twisted and scorched, the smell of burning diesel and iron filling the air. Men in reflective jackets shouted orders, their voices muffled by the roar of flames. But through the haze, Michael's instincts told him, this wasn't an accident. He walked past the barricades, ignored the warnings. His boots crunched on shards of glass and ice. Inside the office trailer, charred papers lay scattered, some still smoking. He crouched, brushing soot away with his gloved hands, and found what remained of a binder, half-burned but legible enough. The title read, Northgate Holdings, Asset Transfers. Michael frowned. He'd seen that name before, years ago, buried in military intelligence reports about shell corporations funding illicit operations overseas. He flipped through the ruined pages until one number caught his eye, 3.2 million wired offshore. His gut tightened. This wasn't just greed, it was laundering, and Pine Valley was part of it. Outside, firefighters yelled for him to move back. The air shimmered with heat. Michael stepped out just as another section of the quarry wall collapsed with a thunderous crack. Snow mixed with smoke, turning gray in the wind. He drove straight to the sheriff's office, the smell of ash still clinging to his jacket. Carter sat behind his cluttered desk, the phone pressed to his ear. When he saw Michael walk in, his expression hardened. "I told you to stay out of this." Michael dropped the half-burned file onto the desk. "You still think it's an accident?" Carter scanned the papers, his eyes narrowing. "Northgate," he murmured. "I've heard that name before. Not here, back when I worked state cases." He leaned back, the old chair creaking beneath his weight. "If this is real, it doesn't stop with Cole. It reaches people you don't even want to know exist." Michael crossed his arms. "So what? We look away?" Carter met his gaze, weary but sharp. "If you hand this over officially, they'll bury it, and they'll bury you right along with it. Pine Valley's a graveyard for truth, son." Michael said nothing for a long time. Outside the frosted window, snow began to fall again, soft, endless, uncaring. Blitz lay at his feet, chin on Michael's boot, eyes half closed, but alert. The warmth of the dog's body was the only steady thing in the cold. Michael reached down, running his hand through Blitz's fur. The old scar along the dog's paw felt like a reminder from another life, one where survival had meaning. "We've made it through worse, haven't we, boy?" he murmured. Blitz gave a quiet huff, tail thumping once against the floorboards. Michael looked back at Carter. "You're right," he said quietly. "They'll bury the truth." Then he stood, tucking the burned pages into his jacket. "That's why I'm not letting them be the ones to write the story." The sheriff didn't stop him this time. As Michael stepped out into the falling snow, the world seemed to fold around him, quiet, white, and waiting. The faint smell of smoke still clung to the wind, a warning that the fire was only just beginning. That night, the sky above Pine Valley split open with fury. Wind howled like a living thing, clawing at the windows and tearing through the frozen pines. The blizzard was the fiercest of the year, thick snow swirling beneath the flash of lightning. Against that chaos, a single pair of headlights carved their way up the winding road toward Pine Ridge Hill, the home of Ryan Cole. Inside the truck, Michael Hayes drove in silence, the muscles in his jaw locked tight. His eyes were fixed ahead, cold, unwavering. Every gust that shook the windshield mirrored the storm inside his chest. Blitz, the German shepherd, sat beside him, posture rigid, amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The dog sensed purpose more than danger, his breathing steady, his body coiled like a spring, waiting for the command. The mansion loomed at the hilltop, a black silhouette against a sky streaked with lightning. The lights inside flickered once, then went dark. The storm had cut the power. Michael killed the engine, stepping out into knee-deep snow, his boots sinking with a crunch. The air was electric, the kind that carried the taste of metal and tension. He moved with precision, silent, deliberate. Every step he took echoed the rhythm of old missions, long buried under desert sand. The front doors, carved oak and glass, were ajar. Inside, the faint gleam of silver reflected off scattered luggage. Cole was packing. Ryan Cole, usually a man of arrogance and control, looked smaller in the half-light. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew. Sweat beaded on his temple despite the freezing air. The storm outside roared, but inside, the mansion was a suffocating silence broken only by the sound of his frantic breathing. When Michael stepped through the doorway, lightning flashed again, revealing him in full. The soaked coat, the hard stare, the face of a man who had seen war and come home to find another. His voice cut through the thunder, deep and steady. "You poured food on my wife. You sent men to my door. And now you're running?" Cole spun, startled, then fumbled toward the desk drawer. His voice cracked. "You think this is about you? You don't know what's coming." Michael stepped closer, boots echoing softly on the marble floor. "I've seen men like you before," he said, eyes narrowing. "In Iraq, in Kandahar, men with power and no soul. But even they didn't hide behind pregnant women." Cole's hand shot out, pulling a gun from the drawer, but it trembled in his grip. The safety clicked off, a shaky sound swallowed by the wind. Blitz growled low, a sound more primal than thunder. Cole's face twitched, his voice breaking. "Don't come any closer." Michael didn't stop. "You've already crossed every line that matters." Then it happened fast. A flash of motion, a bark, a snarl. Blitz lunged, his weight slamming into Cole's arm, teeth locking on the wrist. The gun clattered to the floor, skidding across the tiles. Cole screamed. Falling backward, Blitz released him at Michael's quiet command, retreating but ready. Michael crouched beside the fallen weapon, picked it up, and set it on the table near the suitcase. From inside his coat, he pulled a weathered folder bound with a rubber band. The documents he'd taken from the quarry, the proof of Cole's crimes. He dropped it onto the marble beside Cole's shaking hands. "That's everything you built on lies and blood," Michael said. "It ends tonight." Cole's eyes darted wildly, panic bleeding through his arrogance. "You think this stops anything? There are others, bigger than me. You'll never reach them." Michael looked down at him, calm as ice. "Then I'll start with you." Just then, the sound of sirens began to rise in the distance, muted at first, then clearer, flashing blue and red through the snowstorm. The front gates burst open, and through the chaos of wind and light came the shapes of officers. Sheriff Tom Carter led the charge, his coat whipping behind him, face grim and resolute. "Drop it, Cole!" Carter shouted, his voice carried by the storm. Officers flooded the foyer, weapons drawn. Cole froze, raising trembling hands as cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. As they dragged him toward the door, Cole shouted over the wind, desperate and hoarse. "You don't understand, Hayes. There are people above me, men you can't touch. I'm just a pawn." Michael stood still, snow dripping from his coat, Blitz at his heel. He watched Cole's figure disappear into the blinding white, then finally spoke, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "Pawn or king, when you break what's sacred, you kneel all the same." Lightning split the sky one last time, casting the world in a flash of blue. As the cars vanished down the hill and the mansion fell silent again, Michael turned to Carter, who lingered near the door. "This isn't over," the sheriff said quietly. Michael nodded, looking toward the storm-swept valley below. "No," he murmured. "It's just beginning." Outside, the wind howled through the broken windows, carrying away the scent of fear, and the promise that justice, once awakened, would not rest. A week later, Pine Valley woke beneath a soft, forgiving sun. The storm had passed, leaving behind drifts of white that shimmered under pale morning light. Smoke rose from chimneys again, and the town, once muted by fear, hummed quietly with life. The headlines in the Pine Valley Gazette told a story the people had barely dared to dream. Northgate Holdings under statewide investigation. CEO Ryan Cole indicted and stripped of all assets. Inside Valley Diner, warmth returned with the scent of fresh coffee. The bell above the door chimed softly each time a customer entered, laughter and small talk filling the air. Behind the counter stood Anna Hayes, her belly round beneath her wool dress, cheeks flushed with color that hadn't been there in weeks. She moved slower now, but her hands were steady as she poured coffee into mugs chipped from years of use. Every motion, every smile, felt like reclaiming a piece of peace. When the door opened again, the room fell into a gentle hush, not of fear, but respect. Michael Hayes stepped inside, the cold clinging to his coat. His expression, usually hardened by vigilance, softened as soon as his eyes found Anna. Behind him padded Blitz, the German shepherd, tail swaying lazily, his gait slower now that the fight was done. The dog's fur glistened in the sunlight like brushed bronze, and his ears twitched at every sound, though his spirit was finally at rest. Anna smiled through misted eyes. "You're late," she teased gently. Michael grinned faintly. "Traffic on the mountain," he said, setting his gloves down. The regulars chuckled, the kind of laughter small towns save for men they trust. Moments later, the door opened once more. Sheriff Tom Carter entered, his badge gleaming faintly beneath his heavy coat. He carried a folded newspaper in one hand, the headline visible. Without a word, he placed it on Michael's table. "You did what the rest of us were too afraid to do," he said quietly. Michael shook his head, a calm smile tugging at his lips. "I just did what any man should do, protect his family." Carter studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes that's all it takes to remind the rest of us what courage looks like." He tipped his hat and walked toward the door, his boots leaving wet prints that glowed briefly in the sunlight before fading into the floorboards. Anna reached across the counter, resting her hand over Michael's. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "Our child will grow up in a town with light again." Michael looked at her, his voice soft. Then it was worth every storm. Outside, the sky stretched clear for the first time in months. Sunlight poured through the diner's front window, reflecting off the snow in a blaze of gold. Blitz had settled on the porch, head resting on his paws, watching the world with the calm patience of an old guardian. The sound of children laughing echoed down the street. Michael sipped his coffee, eyes following the light on the snow. In that moment, he understood something his years of service had never taught him, that peace wasn't the absence of war, but the quiet strength to rebuild after it. A single beam of sunlight broke through the window, touching the scar on his knuckle, the one Blitz had licked clean years ago in the desert. He smiled, whispering under his breath, "Even in the darkest winters, God sends a few brave souls to remind us, justice never sleeps." And for the first time in a long while, the soldier felt the warmth of home. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, through the hands of ordinary people who refuse to look away. Michael didn't seek glory. He sought what every heart longs for: peace, justice, and the safety of those he loves. And maybe that's where God works his greatest wonders. Not in the grand, but in the simple courage of one good man who stands when others bow. So, as you watch this story, remember, every act of kindness, every moment of courage is a spark of that same divine light. The world still has storms, but faith, love, and loyalty can calm even the fiercest ones. May God bless you and your family. May his light guide you through your own winters. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Leave a like if you believe miracles still walk among us. And subscribe for more stories where faith and love find a way through the storm.